Welcome. This is the first in a series of videos covering our Ansible 101 workshop. And we're going to be covering modules 1 through 3 out of 7 total modules in this first video. And we'll be covering the other modules in upcoming videos. So for module 1, really we wanted to focus on, especially for a video that's meant to be relatively brief, we wanted to cover primarily this slide and really just understand how Ansible and Ansible Tower compare to one another. So in the first case, Ansible is the free open source project, 100% open source that the community's been working on for several years now. Level Up has been working with it, a number of people on our team for almost 6 years at this point, so quite a bit of experience with it. We like Ansible a lot because it's easy to read. There's nothing to install on remote nodes. It is push-based, and it has quite a bit of OEM and community module support. It's also declarative and version controllable, as a good infrastructure automation framework should be. And it's very friendly to developer self-service, maybe even more so than some of the others on the market. And for that reason, it actually integrates very nicely with your existing CI/CD pipeline approach. At the same time, it gives a pretty fast ramp up for infrastructure and network teams. YAML tends to be very, again, readable. And Ansible, because it's agentless, works pretty much just as well on Windows systems and even network devices as it does on Linux. And it is a top 10 project by contributors on GitHub. So Ansible Tower is a commercial grade offering by Red Hat. Everything that we've been talking about is really covered in this gray box, and Ansible Tower is everything else. So Ansible Tower is fantastic as far as being able to visualize the automations that you have, be able to bring even greater degrees of self-service, enhancements to source control integration, workflow automation, job scheduling, a variety of other things that you would consider to be more enterprise grade. So that pretty much covers module 1. In module 2 of our workshop, we actually tend to do an install, and we ask the folks who join us for our workshops to do these installs themselves. So I'll walk through the code here and doing the setup script, but we really want to demonstrate here just how easy it is to actually get Ansible up and running. We don't have to install anything on remote hosts, and that's kind of a big deal, especially at real scale, that there aren't a lot of dependencies that we have to manage. So you could install Ansible on your laptop. In this case, for the purposes of our workshop, we run everything inside of an AWS EC2 environment. And so we'll be doing an Ansible and also a helper pip module that we'll be installing as a part of this here now. But I did want to highlight just how simple this is in this video. The key here is just that pip install through a virtual environment. We like virtual environments because they're fairly portable and they do isolate a lot of your dependencies versus what you would have on the main system. And so all we really need to do to get started here is to take a workshop VM, and we'll pick this one as the control node just because it's the first. And keeping this very basic for the purposes of this video, we're going to go ahead and log into this. And so we should see that our Bootstrap actually created these files for us, or copied them over really. And so it certainly did. And so that script that I highlighted a moment ago, we're going to go and source that because it's actually going to carry us into our virtual environment as a part of this. So we'll go ahead and let that get started. And because the install does take a few minutes, we're going to pause the video and we'll come back momentarily. And we're back. If you were paying attention to my clock, you'll see that it's just a few minutes later. And so that is basically all we have to do to actually get Ansible installed on a system and start getting to work with it. So that basically covers module 2. We do like to make a note for those who are maybe not as familiar working with text editors, especially in Linux. Vim Tutor is an excellent way to get started there. Of course, if you're familiar with a different text editor, you should use that. But VI tends to be installed pretty much anywhere that you would look for it in Linux and Unix environments, so we tend to go with that by default. Moving on to module 3 here, this is more of a conceptual module, but we do spend some time on it and take questions, especially if folks do have those. But really wanted to just provide a sort of a 1, 2, 3 overview here on how Ansible actually works under the hood. So it is really certainly intended to make things as simple as possible and to make complex things at least possible. And by default in design, Ansible, it uses your own credentials, whether that's SSH based or something else with Active Directory or anything else in between, to authenticate with systems. And it uses SSH to connect at least to Linux hosts. It can use things like WinRM and other protocol transports to connect to Windows, and network devices can be handled a little bit differently depending on the needs there. But as we highlighted, it really doesn't require any additional software to be installed on hosts. That's one of the reasons why it can work with network devices, because installing agents on network equipment isn't really a thing. And so Ansible doesn't need that. A few things that we should know going into working with Ansible. The first rule is that really nothing happens without an inventory. There's no way that Ansible can really understand what it would be doing if there wasn't some kind of host defined, even if it's local host in a few cases. And we actually do demonstrate an example of that in a future video here. But we want to understand, when we're working with inventory files, we want to understand, what it is that that we're doing, and think of our inventory as being basically a noun in the environment. So we'll go ahead and vim that here. And in our case, we're going to go ahead and take a couple of IP addresses, and we're going to go ahead and update our script here, or excuse me, our inventory file. Shouldn't call it a script. And we'll go ahead and turn that into a valid inventory file. Okay, so we've gone ahead and done that, :WQ. Coming back to this, and what we should be able to do here is just to demonstrate how the inventory actually works, is we'll use the ping module, which is a little bit different from an ICMP ping, but gets the same kind of point across. So this is our very first Ansible command that we're running here in this environment. So we use the basic Ansible program, and we have the -i flag to indicate the inventory file, the one that we were just editing. All is a special keyword, which means what you think it would mean as far as the host that it's targeting. The -m flag is for the ping module, M for module. And so we'll go ahead and run that. And with any luck, we should see that both of the hosts that we've targeted are actually up, and that no change was made. It's just identifying them as live systems. Okay, so that sort of sets the table, I think, for being able to talk about everything else now that we understand what an inventory is and somewhat how to work with it. The second rule is that everything that we do with Ansible pretty much happens in the context of a module. And so the above example was with the ping module. We'll use several modules in the course of the video series that we're doing here. But we should think of modules as being kind of like the verbs of Ansible. They are the way that things actually happen. And one of the things that I can recommend, just sort of a pro tip here, is that many modules that you will work with Ansible, they take arguments. And so you should learn to train your eye a little bit and start looking for those arguments to really understand some of the permutations, some of the ways that modules can be utilized, especially at real scale. The third rule is, we've talked about it a little bit, but coming back to is the basic idea that Ansible is declarative, which means that it's idempotent, which means that it doesn't do work that doesn't need to be done. And so we'll be spending a lot of time in future videos kind of reflecting on the difference between something that's already in an okay state because it is in the state that we want it to be versus being changed. But wanted to highlight that as we're closing the first video here, and hope to see you on the next video.